So, Lesley-Ann, thank you for joining us. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Thomas. Yes.
Um, first of all, I wanted to ask you for our listeners who might not be familiar with your work. How would you describe what you do, even for people who are outside the design world, let's say?
So I guess there are two things. Firstly, I consider myself an industrial designer. Um, but the reality is, industrial design is very, very um, vague and open. So maybe 10, 15 years ago, I used to design products. I designed objects, I designed furniture and handbags and things like that. And then later on in my design practice, I stopped designing objects and I worked more maybe around designing systems or designing things that were not tangible, but using the same way that I would think as a designer to work through a process. So, like, I collaborated, I worked with the city as a consultant where we focused on an issue and then we met and we went through the issue. The issue was, for example, homelessness. And then every week we worked through the problem using a typical design process. And then eventually we designed some prototype solutions like programs. And, so there was no object, but I was still designing, right? So that's what I do on one level. I try to understand issues, and then I work with people, and then we design together responses to these issues. But the other level is that I'm a university professor. So I actually, I'm an administrator today. So I manage the Faculty of Design at OCAD University. I'm the Dean of Design at OCAD University in Toronto. And so in that job, what does the dean do? That's sometimes a difficult job, a difficult thing to describe. But the dean, in conjunction with other people, sets the tone and the vision for the faculty. The dean is responsible for working with senior administration in the university. And so actually maybe the dean is a middle manager that we're working between faculty and senior administration to direct the faculty and to the results we're hoping for are student success and faculty success in the research that they do.
Okay, great. Thank you for that introduction.
Thank you.
Regarding going further, we actually wanted to talk to you because we loved your book. So maybe can you maybe walk us through? I know there's a lot of interesting topics and a lot of valuable topics, but maybe walk us through the main ideas and what they're how they are relevant or essential even for social change, let's say.
Okay. So actually, I was going to ask you which book because I was an editor of another book called The Black Experience in Design. And then the book that you are talking about is Design Social Change, which is a book that I did in collaboration with the D School at Stanford University. And so in that book, I was actually building on the work that I did in my doctoral studies, where I focused on designing empowering education and critical education where students would question the world around them and then make some changes through design. And so that's what my PhD was about. And in Design Social Change, I was trying to, let's say, translate that sense of empowerment and agency, away from just the student experience to a more general audience, right? And so Design Social Change, I started writing it as a recipe book where I was trying to think what could be the recipes that could help us understand how to make social change and change the world. And so it's a book of about, let's say, 11 essays in 3 different sections. And the idea is that each essay is giving people some actionable items that they could figure out, okay, what are some little things that they could do to make some change? And the book is divided into 3 sections. And the first section is heavily influenced by Paulo Freire, the Brazilian educator, where I'm really asking people to see the world around them. So it is about building a critical awareness of the world, with the idea that if we can see the world around us and the things that are wrong with the world, then it starts to make it easier to make some change. You can't change what you can't see, right? And so that's what that first section is about, understanding the world around us. There are little essays in that section. So one of them is, for example, understanding oppression, so that we could understand what could be the things that are pushing people down, right? And there's an essay about seeing yourself, understanding who you are and the importance of your own values, and even the problems that you face. The importance of these things in making change in the world, right? So people understand that their issues are important, right? And they can make change around these issues. And then the second big idea of the book is about emotional intelligence. So asking people to lean into their emotions as they make change. So lean into the anger that they might feel about things that are wrong in the world. Don't try to hold back that anger. Use that anger as fuel to make you do stuff. Understand the anger of other people about change that is needed, so that anger of other people can help you understand an issue better. And then another emotion that I ask people to lean into is joy, actually. That we need to live full and joyful lives, or we need joy in those movements about change, because that joy also helps us move. It helps us it helps make the work more I'll use a food analogy. It helps make the work of changing the world more delicious, right? So we have to use that joy as well, right? And then in that section as well, I talk about the communities around us, because we don't actually change the world by ourselves. And so it is about us knowing that we need other people and networks to get us to the change that we want in the world, right? Then the third big section is about imagining equitable futures. And the idea is that if we could start to articulate, to say this is the future that we want, and this is the future where people have equity and life is good for people, that saying what the vision is helps us know what we're working towards, right? And so in that last section, I'm using more design language that other people might not know in that last section. So I talk about co-design, I talk about prototyping, I can't remember what else I talk about right now. But in that last section, I'm really asking people then to imagine the worlds that they think we need, and then figure out what the thing is that they have to design to get there. And the reason I'm using like co-design is so that at least we'll design this world with other people. A lot of people don't know how we prototype things as designers. A lot of people think that we have to make something perfect and that's the end, and they don't realize that as designers, we make stuff and we get feedback all the time, and we're changing the things that we make, and we're in these constant loops. And so in that last section, I was trying to see, well, how could we get the way that we think as designers just out in the world, so that other people will try this and understand, oh, we have to make these little prototypes to get to the worlds that we want. So we figure out, the first section is about seeing that world and understanding what needs to change. Second section is about working with other people and understanding the emotions. And the third section is supposed to make people feel like they want to do something, right? And so like the first time my mother read the book, my mother is in her late 70s, so she read an early version of the book, and she called me and she said, I'm going to go into the school next door and I'm going to create a project about something. And I said, yes, that's what I want. I want people to read the book and see, just see that, oh, change is possible. They find people who want to make the change with them and they can go out and do something. And it could be a big thing or a small thing, but they can do something. So I'll stop for a second. How's that?
Amazing.
Thank
I have
you.
a question.
Yes,
Hi,
sir.
Leslie.
Hi, Ed.
I enjoyed your work a lot. I want to ask, what are things people want to change? We're talking about change in the world. In your experience, what are the main things people want to change?
So the main thing might not be an easy thing to say, but because I work with people from a lot of different backgrounds. When I lived, so I just moved to Canada from the United States, and I lived in the United States for 9 years. The surprising thing that came up in a lot of my conversations with students would normally have my class like in the second year of university, so they might be about 19, 20. They would often talk about the health system in the United States and the importance of changing that. And I mean, even, okay, as a person in the States, well, as a parent, I always thought about the health system, but I didn't expect 19-year-olds to be thinking about it, and that was something that would come up all the time. Every time I asked students about what's something that they want to change, and I ask them in a particular way. I say, what is what's the world that you imagine in 2050? And I give them a sentence and ask them to finish a sentence. So they say, in 2050 there will be no more X, or in 2050 there will be more whatever. And like I said, free education is another thing that would come up often, right? Health, some really basic things would come up over and over. I think climate change would come up in different ways, where they might say that in 2050 people will understand these climate change issues and we wouldn't have to be talking about them in the same way. I expected people to talk maybe more about race and say there would be more racial equity, but sometimes it wouldn't come up in some of the conversations that I've had with people. But I definitely, health and education were things that people wanted to change, where they were hoping that people would have more and free access to these issues when I was in the States. But now I'm in Canada, where health is free and university education is lower cost. So I don't know, I haven't asked young people yet in Canada what they want to change, but it's actually their responses are in fact related to equity. The fact that we all want free health or free education. It is about making sure that people's needs are met. And so these are the questions that people want. But one thing that is maybe surprising, if we're talking about the change that people want to make, and if people have a lot of freedom to talk, then actually people will also talk about things that you might not want to change, right? Or things that, so every now and again, people would propose change that I felt was taking us backwards. But it's not my job, my job, I felt, was to get people to talk about change and understand that they can change the world. But every now and again, I would also see change that I felt was a little bit like a backwards move. Students proposing change that seemed like a backwards move, like maybe anti-women's rights or anti-women's health, right? And, so there would always be a few people who thought that we had made too much change, and they would talk about, taking things backwards. So it goes both ways, though. If you get people to think that they could change the world, that they can make us go backwards too.
So, regarding this same topic, how do you find that? Because I saw your work was mainly like, for if you had to say for whom it was directed to, let's say it was like for people to know that they have actually more agency and more capability for change than they usually think they do,
Yes.
and also for people or certain sectors with more power and more tools for change making, and maybe how to address it properly, let's say.
Yeah. Yeah.
So regarding the first group, how would you say along your inside your your own work, did you find that there are certain like practices or ways or in proper incentives to get people to know and act, and besides knowing they like knowing they have more agency, do they how do you incentivize them to actually like
You mean
make
what's the
changes,
next
take
step?
action? Yeah.
Yeah, so that's I I don't know that I have a clear answer yet, but what I've been encouraging people to do is lean into that second section where I say find other people to make this change with you, right? Because when people make little groups, then groups can lobby for stuff, or they could, groups can ask in a more effective way. And so, like I really emphasize that question of networks, right? So, the next step that I ask people to do is to find partners and form coalitions about the change that they want, right? Um, can I confirm if they've all done this? No, I can't, right? But I do have people and groups sometimes reaching back out to me to just to give me like tiny updates. Um, so I don't know if that's a concrete answer, but the next step that I ask people, yes, is to form groups and figure out what they're going to do next. Sometimes I do ask people, there is grassroots change that we make on our own, right? There's change that we make in the way that we make people think about issues, right? So like there's a publicity element that sometimes has to come with change, and we change public opinion on issues by talking about issues as well, right? And then there is a political element that sometimes has to happen, or very often has to happen in the change making process. And so then that's an additional step that I encourage people to do, where they embrace the fact that the world is political and life is political, and that they can in fact find the people that they need to support them in making change. Their government representative, political parties that might be aligned with them, the local government. There is sometimes, depending on what it is that people want to change, they do have to do some they have to get into activism. And so, I don't call my work and my class, I don't use that word explicitly, but it is that's the way that I'm trying to encourage change, by having people, become more activist in the work that they're doing, because it's activists that activists are doers, and they yes, in fact, make a lot of change in the world.
Sure, because I find that was actually a great answer. The part of the community part was something I wasn't thinking about. It is actually essential. I actually see it as essential in two ways. One is like the capabilities, like the augmented capabilities of a group
Yeah.
versus an individual, like isolated individuals, and also in some other way more regarding to like problems problem perception, like where is the actual problem? Because mainly if you have like maybe today lots of isolated individuals not gathering into communities, not diverse even communities, for like to actually perceive which is the actual problem, or take different perspectives, let's say.
Yes.
You have lots of like isolated individuals consuming maybe information from different sources with their own agendas, and they can't actually like get to the point where they actually perceive what they want to change, like for real. And maybe communities also like maybe safeguard people from that, like actually what's the problem, let's talk, let's take action.
Yes.
Like perceive the actual problem. So that's
Yes.
great, that's great, and thank you for your answer. And I was thinking one more thing on another topic that is actually related, is the fact that you talked about oppression. I usually people get this word maybe wrong. I think you address it a little bit differently from the side of design, let's say, because oppression seems like something that is like power, like imposed power, and maybe there's some other kinds of oppression that are more like passive, more like accidental, let's say, like we simply didn't see this.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
So, let's see. I'm thinking where to start because there's so many places to start, right? Pedagogy of the oppressed, probably, and you know, Paulo Freire's work in general is probably what got me to think more intentionally about oppression in the work that I was doing as a designer. And then there are designers, other designers who talk about oppression, who I've kind of formed little communities, or I've joined their communities when I realized that they were talking about the same thing. But when I read Paulo Freire's work, there were a few things that stood out to me. And then one thing, you know, I don't remember which book this is in. It's most likely in Pedagogy of the Oppressed, where he talks about how the middle class very often cannot see the issues of the class just below them, or you know, when people move from one class to the next, they can no longer see the issues of the class that they just left, right? And so it's that that idea that I was bringing to that section, and that area in the course that I taught, right, where I asked people to learn to see oppression and learn to see where people are being held down, because you know, other people's oppressions become invisible to us, right? But if we kind of use this muscle of learning to see what are the oppressions that people around us might be facing, and you know, how are they being pressed down literally, then it means that, like, in the work that we are doing as designers, or in these futures that we are imagining, we can eliminate, we can imagine out, we could design out these oppressions so that they don't continue to keep people back, right? And you know, I could talk about race, or I could talk about gender, but there are a lot of oppressions that people don't see. You know, like even in my experience as when I became a parent, I had most of my friends didn't have children, and you know, they would be, some of my friends, let me not accuse all of my friends of this, but you know, some people would continue to do things that then now excluded me as a parent. And you know, it might be difficult to describe this as parent oppression, but it is the fact that as a parent I was being kind of pushed down because my friends couldn't see how the things that they were doing were eliminating me, right? Or but you know, if you start to exercise that muscle and start to see, okay, what are the barriers that other people are facing, then you know, because we are designers and we're thinking of solutions, we could think of solutions to eliminate those specific barriers. So that's the work that I want people to do. And then you know, like, I don't describe this in the book, but there's a way that I talk about oppression sometimes in my classes that helps people get it a little bit more, you know, where I talk about left-handed oppression, right? And I say, well, what if, like if you have people in your life who you love who are left-handed and you talk with them about how the world keeps them back, then you start to understand kind of like the importance of eliminating that oppression. These people have no, there's no reason that they were born left-handed, and because they were born left-handed, they can't use the scissors, maybe they can't use a screwdriver, they can't open the door properly, and then if as a designer you start to think, oh, what can I do to eliminate those oppressions, then it changes the way that you think about work, right? The work that you do. And when I talk about the left-handed oppression, it's an easier conversation. No offense to all the left-handed people, right? But it's an easier conversation, or I don't even have to say no offense, but it's just an easier conversation to have than if I talk about race or if I talk about gender. If I, and people get that and they start maybe looking for barriers or interviewing people about barriers differently when we discuss that.
I actually think Hernan is left-handed.
Yeah, I'm left-handed.
So
Yeah.
tell me about
We
your
need-
left-handed
We need
oppression.
designers. No, it's funny you talk about that because I'm left-handed, and yes, things aren't designed for us, but at the same time we can develop like another sort of intelligence to move around,
Yes.
and that's maybe like a pro, no, like something good, because you have to. In my case, that I'm left-handed, I don't feel oppressed in like in major ways in
Yes.
life, but that I see that as an advantage, actually.
Well, how I landed on the left-handed thing, it's not really oppression, right? Or, no, I'll go back to the original thing. Yes, it can be oppression, right? But I was going to work one day and I gave my son a can of tuna, and I gave him the can opener and I said, open that tuna and sit down and have breakfast. It was just this frantic morning. And I went to continue getting ready, and then I came back out and I see him looking at the can, and I'm like, what is going on? Why hasn't this child opened this tin of tuna yet? And then he said, Mommy, this can opener doesn't work for me. And I had never thought about, that perspective, right? Or actually there is, I think I read some research somewhere that said maybe, Hernan, you might laugh, but it's like maybe longevity outcomes are different for left-handed people, and it might be because of it's random things, like maybe I don't know, the door handle doesn't work and therefore left-handed people.
Or accidents in the workplace. I think there were,
Yes,
tools
yes.
that weren't designed actually for left-handed people, and more
Yes.
accidents, like they had
Exactly.
more trouble handling.
Yes. Yes. So it might be a superpower, but it is something that we still have to address, if that makes sense. Right? And
Yeah,
then
absolutely.
and then as designers we have the power to do that, to change focus on issues. So that's really what this idea is about. Yes.
Yeah, it's interesting because I mean, this kind of oppression are like stressing like environments, let's say, not actually optimized for everyone. Actually, they are difficult for the people who don't have the capability, let's say, and at the same time it triggers or catalyzes adaptation, right? Because it catalyzes like
Yes.
a new way, like another way. Like how are you gonna handle this environment? You
Yes.
gotta get creative to like
Exactly.
deal with,
Yes.
with the context. So it's
Yes.
like a double-edged sword, let's say.
Yes.
So regarding the same topic, I bet like I heard you talk about this, like knowing ourselves, and like for as an essential part of design, and also like in that same process of knowing ourselves, like the knowledge of our own biases that we bring to the design process, and how do you found any like ways or specific ways or typical biases that appear in the design process, let's say?
Oh, definitely. And sometimes if like, and you were just talking about I don't know if you said superpower, but yeah.
Yeah, I think Tom said like a superpower.
Okay, yes. Well, sometimes our biases, we could think of them like in that way, right? Where the issue with biases, or what I ask people to do is to declare their biases. And in some cases, it's not quite that your bias is a strength, but it's that your bias could give you insight into a specific point of view. But we need to know about that bias. That's really what the issue is, right? So, the biases that exist, maybe very often we'll be biased towards people our same age, right? Or, the obvious one is race and gender. We'll have a bias, either a bias towards our own race or a bias towards the race that we might have been told is superior, right? So like whoever's the dominant group, we all subtly or subconsciously will have a bias to, either towards that group or towards people who we think look like us, right? The other bias is, it could work either way. I might have a bias towards a male point of view because I've been told over and over and over that men are smart, right? Or I might have a bias to support other women, right? But I have to kind of think about what these biases could be, So it's not necessarily that the bias is very specific, but yes, definitely we could look for biases around race and gender or even language. A colleague of mine very recently told me that we were talking about bias based on people's accents, right? So like, how strong is your accent as you speak, right? If you, in the world of, we were actually talking about English speakers and how English speaking people will often be biased against, people with different accents, right? Or might have a bias towards a name that sounds like a more English sounding name than other people. It depends on where you live. Some places are like very, very cosmopolitan. So when I moved to Toronto, or Toronto, as local people say, right, that bias started to disappear. The biases against me that existed in the last place that I live, started to disappear because Toronto is much more cosmopolitan. There are more people from my heritage or ethnicity, and so it just became a place where some of those biases disappeared. Maybe there are other biases here that I have to learn to see how people, what are the more common biases people have here. Yeah.
And would you, because I truly think we've got to make the experiment. Maybe there's some research around it, but I really think that when you talked about community as the means towards change, or the best means towards change, or activism through the community. I think communities actually tend to like neutralize bias if they work properly, right? If we get the right like synergy inside the community, it usually neutralizes a lot of biases. But it must be. This is important. Like my insight is, or my idea is that it has to be diverse enough.
Yeah, that's the thing. It depends on how diverse your community is. It's that people will bring their biases with them, and maybe their biases will neutralize each other as they work, right?
Only but if I mean,
Yeah.
it needs diversity, I think, because if not, it usually like strengthens and crystallizes bias. If you make like an
Yes.
echo chamber of a group that only thinks the same things, it usually
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
gets
And
worse.
yes. And the thing about us talking about what our biases could be is that in our own reflective processes, we can sometimes calibrate or, in our minds, right? Like, I am aware of some of the biases that I have, right? So when I do research, I know that I have a bias towards doing qualitative research. And sometimes I have to really force myself to think about, okay, what could be the value of qualitative research, right? Or I'll go into a conversation. Right now, I'm the Dean of Design. We have several programs. I know I'm an industrial designer at heart. And so I'll remember as we have our conversations that I probably have a bias for industrial design, and sometimes I have to calibrate that, So it's like the thing about declaring our biases sometimes is about us remembering, okay, we might have to do extra work to compensate for the biases that we have, right? Or we have to know that we're going to flip in a certain way, and then for us to really be more fair, we might have to tweak our processes a little bit. So that's also part of what this week is about, right? Can I ask you some questions?
Yeah,
Yeah,
sure.
please.
I'll flip the interview. Who are you both? Right?
This never
What?
happened. I'm not prepared
No.
for this.
Um, tell me about tell me about who you are and why. Declare your positionality. Who are you and why did you want to have this conversation?
We are very interested in human behavior around the world. We have a marketing agency, so we want to talk with the people that we find very interesting to learn, basically, to know how they think, ask them questions. We had amazing conversations with Robin Dunbar, with Robin McCarty from Hartmouth Institute. So we are just curious to know about it. We want to
Yeah.
ask questions.
Okay. All right. And Tomas?
Yeah, that's what Hernan said. That's the main thing. We are very interested in human behavior, and we're just trying to make the the ideas we find most relevant from our time, let's say, like maybe more known,
Yeah.
mainly on our immediate environment, mainly more here in South America, Argentina. Let's say we're speaking with everyone we can, both
Mm-hmm.
in English and in Spanish, and
Yes.
we're trying to just make these world-changing ideas that we consider world-changing, um, just more available. That's our
Okay.
mission, let's say.
Okay. I have more questions, but I'll let you, if you want to ask a question, and I'll hold it back and I'll ask another question later on.
Go ahead, ask.
So, I want to bring back Hernan's question and ask you, well, what is the change that you both think you want to make, or how do you want to change the world?
I want to change the conversation. I think we're talking about very. Here in Argentina, we have podcasts and we have how do you say, like this streaming content that they talk about nothing, just absolutely nothing. So I want people in Argentina to start talking about these cultural changes, these social changes, because there are a lot of things happening in the world, and I think that let's talk about it. It's very interesting.
Yeah, so I think on the same answering the same question. Um, I think that we're trying actually to take action in your terms. Like we actually
Yes.
trying to take action, like put something out there, have the conversation, like even form a community. That's our
Yeah.
idea, where we can discuss, actually end up on a diverse enough group, and try to see which are the actual problems we have in different like contexts, and try to talk and like discuss it to get towards a solution, let's say. So that I would say is the main goal, and I think it comes from uh, both Hernan and I have like backgrounds of both like having our own issues that we could like uh, we went through them, and we came up
We could
better on the
thrive.
other side.
Yes.
And we just think, I actually feel, I know a lot of people I talk with, and I feel there are a lot of like underground, like kept inside issues, and I don't think the actual community to address them is available there. Like saying we all have problems, let's talk about them. Let's a lot of young people mainly, and we just have this idea, maybe in your terms also, like the utopian idea of
Yes.
actually getting there, like gathering, like getting that community together and making something meaningful.
Yes. You know, one thing I could share with you all that I don't think I've ever said really in an interview. It's so I'm from Trinidad and Tobago, and I've lived outside of Trinidad and Tobago for many years. But I haven't migrated to anywhere, you know. So I mean, I wasn't a U.S. citizen. I'm not a Canadian citizen, and so and you know, like even when I lived in Brazil for 6 years. Was not Brazilian, and so in the work that I do, I'm trying to get people excited about issues and maybe even get excited about politics because I don't vote, right? And it's not that I don't vote because I don't want to. It's because I don't vote because I'm not in my home country, right? And so, you know, all I could, when I find people who are kind of apolitical and not interested in issues, not interested in these kind of conversations, I kind of feel that my work as a professor, as a designer, as someone wanting to make change, is that I have to get people excited about even just talking about the problems that we have in the world, so that then they could take action, because actually, like, there are millions of people like me that we can't take action. You know, all we can do is get other people, you know, more politically aware, and we can conscientize, right, other people so that they'll take action. So, you know, that's when I was designing my course, it's a little bit about that, you know, that at the end of the semester, I needed to make sure that the students that I was teaching were more aware of the world around them, and could figure out what action they wanted to take, right? And one story that I think is in the book, so the first time I did this work with dreaming about utopian futures, I worked with children, and they were between 8 to 12 years old. And when I shared the curriculum with the administrator said, "Oh my goodness, you're going to make these people angry. You're going to make these children angry." And you know, it's a scary thing, but I do want people, we don't have to be angry all the time, but you know, we have to be able to see when X is not actually good enough, and we need to talk about what Y should be, right? And so that's what my job is. My change making work is that, right? Other people might have other change making work where they are more active, but my change making work is about planting seeds in minds and making people see things that they need to do, right?
Yeah, we like a few weeks ago, I was talking with, I don't know if you know, are you familiar with Dave Snowden?
I know the name. Yes.
Like
Yes.
the
Yeah.
Kinefin framework.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So that's really interesting too, like from a social change perspective. And we were talking about this, and I think it it actually correlates with some aspects of your work, which is this part of the inner development problem, let's say. Like we like this all like new agey or new spirituality or new inner development, like I don't know, like schools, let's say, or practices people have nowadays are strictly focusing on something like, let's force our happiness, or let's just like imagine this in Jung terms. Let's imagine like light figurines, like happy figurines, and not actually taking a look to what is like the actual darkness or the problems, and actually embrace the anger, the sadness, whatever like emotions that are actually signaling the fact that maybe that's exactly where a
Where
solution
the issue? Yes.
should
Yes.
be
Yes.
designed. Like it actually is showing you where the problem is, right?
Yes.
So this idea of how we should actually pay attention to those kinds of emotions too, and not just try to ignore and
Yes.
like imagine some kind of happy place, or I don't know. That's really important, mainly from the point of making a solution, like designing
Yes.
solutions. It's like the problems are there.
But I have a struggle, and I'm agreeing with you 100%, right? When I ask people to imagine utopias, sometimes though, I wonder if I'm asking people to go too far, right? But I don't believe I am, if that makes sense. That I sometimes wonder, boy, can they get to that place when we have so many other basic issues to deal with, right? Can we dream that far, wherever the utopia is? But I do think that we need to push people to imagine utopias that they want, right? Like I know I have read different books where I think Dunn and Raby possibly, and then there are quite a few books I think that talk about the muscle of imagination, and so it's like I think also in the work that I'm doing, I'm trying to get people to use that muscle and dream, maybe beyond where people might think is possible for them, right? But at the back of my mind, sometimes I do have a little hesitation, like, is it too far, or is it too frustrating? But I think that we have to have that goal, and figure out, what we do as designers. We can break things into chunks, so we can figure out, okay, the goal is that we want to be X place in 2050, but we could kind of figure out what are the steps to get us there, and then work on these steps little by little.
Yeah, because I mean, surely if you make that exercise, as you said before, you might have like people who dream, like imagine too far onto a actually dystopian future, because I mean, maybe they're triggered by their own biases and they just go too far, and they now
Yeah.
have a great idea of like, I don't know, a dystopian situation. We can imagine infinite versions of it, but I think it's great. I think it's great. Maybe if you just like make the exercise and then like get into that feedback loop you said. So you just like have the dream of the future of this like future utopia, and then you just put it against the conflicts it actually can generate, because at the end of the day you're gonna have to deal with all those like complex conflicts, let's say, that like
Yes.
emerge from complex systems, let's say, because you can make a solution, but maybe that solution we've seen infinite cases where solutions for one specific aspect of life actually triggers many other problems in other scenarios.
Yes, definitely.
So that
Yeah.
conversation, between those conflicts, that's actually what I wanted to talk to you about, because we might have like people who are like who have conflicting worldviews, and you were talking about joy and how it invites to the process, and or even play, how play facilitates, because play actually like dissociates a little bit from ourselves being too like emotionally involved into the situation, and maybe facilitates the conversation from different like people who have conflicting worldviews. Is that right? Does it work?
Yeah. And that's a question?
Yeah. Does it work
Oh gosh.
like going into play, let's say,
Uh-huh.
and generating
Ah.
joy to confront like people with different worldviews and getting towards a solution, let's say.
Okay, so I have to think, how am I going to answer this? I think that there's a part of the conversation across different worldviews that sometimes you can't get to. Sometimes the worldviews are too dramatically different, right? So I guess maybe it's like we need to see where the people with the differing worldviews are open to conversation, right, and open to the discussion. And where those people are, then yes, I think that the play definitely helps, right? And but every now and again you meet people with completely different worldviews that they're just not open to coming together to have the conversation. And I hate to say it, sometimes that conversation, sometimes it's not worth the energy to go there, right? But where we have people who are open to the different, to crossing worldviews to have conversation, I do think that, play is a leveler. I think that even, as we think about our identities, we often find points of similarities across people who seem like they have different worldviews, right? And so sometimes those similarity points become places that we can enter other people's worlds, because I'll talk about mothering again. I can enter the world of people who I seem to have no kind of connection with, sometimes through parenting, talking about parenting in general or mothering in specific, and that starts to give us a little place where we have a point of similarity and we can have these conversations. So I guess it's that the play opens up the frame so that we could have good connections and good conversations, and it's about, yes, in us not taking ourselves too seriously, and then being able to throw ourselves into a process with other people and have this shared experience. I don't know if I gave you a really good answer for that, but play then becomes a leveler in a good way, and then we can be creative in a process together and come up with some new ideas together, right? And like I saw that firsthand when I worked on a project with police and residents in a city, and it was a 1 day or 2 day workshop. I don't remember now how long it was, but it was a very playful a playful workshop, which I think allowed us to build relationships very quickly, because just the way the environment was set up, with music, with food, with icebreakers, with jokes, with, people had to tell stories about their new group partners who were from the other tribe and quotes, So just by creating that playful environment, we were able to then build trust very quickly. And then they designed things together by the end of the day. So they designed new they propose new ideas for workshops, for programs, so very quickly they were able to build their relationships through play.
Yeah, that's great because I think the act of the community and the police, let's say in this case, like actually knowing each other, it's insane because in a big city you actually lose this kind of this kind of relationship
Yeah.
of being connected. Of
Yeah.
course, it's gonna change behavior. Let's say.
Yes, exactly. So we started the workshop with people very unsure of who in the room was police and who wasn't, right? And actually we had some ground rules for the police that they couldn't be in uniform. They couldn't, and I think it created an environment where people were able to relax a little bit more. And it was actually, I can say this in a humorous way now, that it was funny to see one group working together where I think one woman looked at another woman and said, "Oh, you're not you're not one of us, are you?" Kind of like you because she assumed that it was a woman police officer, and she assumed that the woman police officer was a community partner, community resident, and then it was just, it's again, through the play, through the conversation, everybody humanized each other. And you're right, in a big city you don't have maybe opportunities for that, but in these small workshops we can humanize people and start to understand issues from different points of view. Actually, the police were the community, because again, when we were able to see them as people in quotes, we were able to realize, they're dealing with some of the same issues that we're dealing. They also have family members who are also afraid of the police, or who are, they also have family members in jail, or, we were able to use storytelling to get closer to the issues at hand. I'm going way off topic here, right?
Yeah, but it's amazing. I think I believe in quitting while you're ahead, because I think it's been an amazing podcast. And I have only one more question.
Yes, sir.
How do you imagine the world 25, 30 years from now?
Oh my goodness. 25 or 30 years from now, I'll side with my students and say that I really hope that most people aren't having to struggle to think about how they're paying for education. I'm talking about university education, or even education right across from primary all the way up to secondary. I'm hoping that 25, 30 years from now, if you get ill, you don't have to worry about, the cost of treatments. I hope that processes will seem fairer, will be fairer, and then we don't have to worry about discrimination against us because of race and gender and language and accent. So, it's really that level of equity that I'm very interested in. And the thing about education is about people having access to better lives, and I'm hoping that opportunity is available to everyone, or to many more people than it's available to today. And I hope that we will be living in joyful worlds where maybe we will work less than we have to today, and we will be more satisfied. So who knows if we'll have more money, less money, but I'm hoping that many people could work maybe a little bit less, but have easier lives in the future, right? Yes.
Can I make my own last question?
Of course you can.
Okay. I wanted to know if like in your entire like life, or either work or outside work, if you found like a habit or or a mindset that was like truly game changer for you.
In what context? Let me see.
I don't know, like that actually made practically your life better, like work better or
Uh, um, I think that there are probably a few things. So now I have to think of which one to share. Um, there's an anecdote that I share in the book that I think really made a big impact for me, made a big change, right? Which is, um, there was a particular experience where I was really very angry, and uh, like a mentor type person told me to not just to swallow this anger that I had. He said I needed to really think about what was the cause of the anger. And this was in a work context, and he said I needed to be able to write about, kind of use the anger as fuel, but he said I needed to write about the let's say the consequence of my colleagues not including the point of view that I was talking about, right? And the way he talked about it, he really was emphasizing that I needed to continue to be productive, and maybe to be able to articulate more clearly why my point of view was important, right? And work through that anger, right? And I think that that was that counseling that he gave me made me actually think more critically when I was in an angry place, right? And it maybe didn't just bottle up everything, it helped me figure out how to articulate some of my ideas better. And so that was very useful. And I continue to use that, when I'm upset about something. I try to think about, okay, what's the thing that's really making me upset, and what's the consequence of that thing being included or not in a discussion, for example, right? Then the other thing that I think has been a game changer for me is about taking risk, and being in action, right? And not kind of just being complacent and saying, well, that's the way how it is, right? I've always pushed myself into action when I needed to, like, and I've worked many jobs. I've lived in a lot of different places. It's very often it takes a certain level of risk to get me to the next place. And I know for sure that there are a lot of people in the same situation that I've been in the same types of situations, probably wouldn't take that leap to the next step, right? And so that's part of why I encourage people to move into action, because the action takes us somewhere, and it's very often to a better place, right? So I think that I'll call it a design mindset of wanting to get to the next place has served me very well, and I encourage other people to move into action and not just be passive and let things happen to us, to actually respond and do stuff.
yes, that's great. Those are both two great habits or mindsets, let's say, like mainly thinking critically and taking action. That's
Yes.
that's great. So thank you for everything. I don't know if people want to keep up with your work, where can they do it?
So the best thing is actually to just connect with me on LinkedIn. That's easy. I try to share when I have interesting things going on. I try to share that. And I'm just accessible on LinkedIn. I'm at OCAD, so that's Ontario College of Art and Design, so I'm pretty easy to find. And then I'm a very active member of the Design Research Society, so it's another place where people can connect with me. But like on social media, LinkedIn or Instagram are like the easiest places to find me.
Okay, Lesley-Ann.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you
Let's keep
both.
in touch.
Yes.
Let's talk again.
All right.